The end of the year is quickly getting here, and you know what that means. Lots of new information and rumors and leaks about the upcoming new Samsung phones, the S23 series, which will probably launch sometime end of January, early February, just like the S22 did this year. And that's all well and good. I've even seen some articles talking about how wonderful the new Snapdragon 8 Generation 2 is going to be. And it was funny because I saw one article, I can't remember who, but they were talking about how the Snapdragon processors probably are finally going to be almost on par with the last generation of the Bionic processor that Apple makes, the A15. So apparently, and this is maybe common knowledge or maybe it's not, so when it comes to benchmarks, synthetic benchmarks, we're not talking about real world performance, we're talking about on paper when they run these tests that tell you what the power is, the N22s, the benchmarks, all that stuff. Basically what they're saying is the single core and the multi-core speeds are finally almost as good as Apple. And like the last couple of years, even for the longest time, they're usually about 2 or 3 years behind. And they're not nearly on the same level, especially when it comes to efficiency. And I think a lot of that has shown up in a lot of ways. But does it really? Is it something that you should really buy into? And I think the answer to that is a resounding no. I mean, if you look at the benchmarks on the Google Pixel 7 phones, I mean, it's not something that you're going to go, oh, this is so amazing compared to a Snapdragon 8 Generation 2. But where the rubber meets the road is performance and what it actually does. And if you've noticed something over the last couple of years, when you get these fancy phones, they're starting to kind of all run the same. So whenever the phones are kind of running the same, you can run a game, you can run an app, you can load 10 apps and run them all simultaneously. I mean, we've got phones with 12, 16, 18 gigabytes of RAM now on the Android side, and you're still rocking like 4 and 6 over on the iPhone. It's hard to compare them side by side because they're so different. And one great thing about Apple is all their stuff is built from the ground up and optimized around their hardware and the software experience. So they're always going to be a leg up in that department. But as you probably notice, when you look at the Android world, people, they basically consider the Samsung Galaxy S series phones to be on par and synonymous with the iPhones. For a good reason, because they run mostly the same. And last year was kind of an anomaly with the iPhone 13 series with their just such amazing battery life, which Apple mostly ruined with the iPhone 14 and iOS 16. iOS 16 has been a giant pain in the butt, at least for me. I know some other people as well. So, talking about the S23 series phones, looking into the future, will the Ultra have a 200 megapixel camera? Probably. Is it going to be probably a lot better than the 108 megapixel camera? No. And I'm not trying to poop all over the S23. I just want to try and place things into context. It'll be good. But we heard all about the amazing Snapdragon 8 Generation 1 and what it was going to do. And then it showed up and it's like, maybe it runs a little hotter than we thought. And then we had to wait for the Plus series to come out in the fall and kind of rein things in a little bit, give us a little bit better power efficiency, not so many heat issues, and also, of course, some light mode profile stuff that you get with like the Fold 4, so that way you can actually get great battery life out of it, right? All joking aside, the S22 Ultra, very good phone. The S22 Plus, for lack of my criticism on it being a $999 phone that just doesn't really have all the features I think it needs to be a $1,000 phone. I mean, it's not even Quad HD Plus for Pete's sake. I mean, how are you gonna have a $1,000 phone and basically all the flagship level phones, anything over $700-800, pretty much has a Quad HD Plus, and there's some other things like it doesn't have as nice of the camera. It was very obvious that what they did with the S22 Plus, fairly middling. They'll catch people who don't want to get the really big S22 Ultra, but also it gives them a reason to upsell and go, well, if you want all those things, pay the $11.99 price tax and go straight and get the S22 Ultra. And I don't really have anything bad to say about the S22 Ultra. I think it's a great phone, but I think that they chopped the legs out from under the S22 and the S22 Plus. And I think that the real recipe for success, especially if they want their sales to pick up, is not relying on everybody going out and buying the future S23 Ultra. They need to put some teeth back into the S22 and the S22 Plus and give you a compelling reason to buy them, not make them a compelling reason to not buy them and get the Ultra. I mean, if that's the case, just make the stinking Ultra. I don't really think we need 3 models at this point in time anyway. And the biggest thing they need to fix, put a decent battery in the S22. How does the S22 have a 3700 milliamp battery, but then they can put the same 3700 milliamp battery in the Z Flip 4? And the Z Flip 4, of course, gets a better performance because it has the Snapdragon 8 Plus Generation 1. I really enjoyed my experience with the S22. People want a flagship caliber experience, and they don't necessarily want a big 6.7, 6.8, 6.6 inch phone. 6.1 with basically no bezels on it is kind of like the old 5.8 inch phone of yesteryear, i.e. the iPhone 10, iPhone 10s. It was a very good sized phone. So if you look at that and you look at the recipe for success there, I think maybe they should just get rid of the Plus model. Like, bye, go away. And if you look at what everybody else is doing, I mean, they're kind of doing the same thing, except you look at Apple and they've got 4 phones now in their normal category pricing. You got the iPhone 14, the 14 Plus, then you got the Pro and the Pro Max. So 2 kind of distinct series there, but really it's like 4 phones and they're suffering, and people don't want the 14 Plus. And I don't blame them. It's an $899 ripoff with last year's hardware. However, let that be a lesson to Samsung. People want a good experience. They want to get a top of the line experience and not have it all dumbed down. So when you look at the S22 and you see it's got like abysmally poor battery life, and then the screen is okay. Of course, it's got the 120 hertz refresh rate. The Snapdragon 8 Generation 1 does provide good performance, but it just nukes the battery. No way around it, really, other than just the software stuff and then basically throttling everything down, which of course they got in trouble for with their game software that was basically throttling everything and making it run way slower than it should. So we're going to see that new light mode, of course, come into the S23. People are already talking about how that combined with the Snapdragon 8 Generation 2 is going to be such an amazing combination. You know what they're talking about? The great thing is, yes, we get these really, really powerful chipsets, but then for basically anything other than top-line performance you want in, like, let's say, playing a game or some hardcore multitasking, they're severely throttled. Like, the software has to rein them in and run them much slower than the maximum speeds. You don't need the phone to run at the maximum speed, but of course, that's how they deal with it, and that's how they deal with the heat. That's how they get you better battery life. But of course, they're looking at like, I think like a 25% performance increase over the Snapdragon 8 Generation 1, and talking about much, much better multi-core speed, and talking about better power efficiency, meaning hopefully it won't get as hot, and hopefully it will give you better battery life. They need to have at least a 4,000 milliamp battery. I would say a 4,100 milliamp battery in the S23. I'm sorry, the 3,700 milliamp battery was a disaster, and they need to find some way to get around that. Hopefully they do, and hopefully they make it more appealing. And of course, we're still going to get 3 phones. I'm like 99.999 1,000% sure we're going to do that, but I don't think the sales model supports that anymore, especially with the way the market is. I don't know what the sales numbers look like on the S22. I'm sure we'll see those here probably as we get towards the end of the year, but I know the first quarter was good, and then I know they went like that. So we'll see. There's been a big economic downturn, and there's such an oversaturation whenever it comes to smartphones. Everybody has them now, and they're supported for longer and longer and longer, which is a recipe for failure when you keep trying to do the same thing and you just do these minimal iterations. Of course, phones are not designed so every year everybody goes out and spends another $1,000 on a phone. I would like to see them bring the price down on the S23. I think they need to really, really be more competitive. If you take a look at the iPhone, they kept theirs the same. They didn't go up. iPhone 14 Pro, $999. iPhone 14 Pro Max, $1099. And then you look at the S22 Ultra, it was $1199. I think they need to bring it down, especially considering the market, everything going on. I know they'd probably cut into their profit margins, but in the end run, I think they'll probably move more phones. So I think they need to be more competitive. Look at what Google has done with the Pixel 6 and the Pixel 7, completely undercutting the competition. If they were anybody but Google, people would probably bat a serious eyelash at that, because they're not really a big competitor when you look at Samsung, who's selling over 100 million devices globally every year, and Google's happy to sell like 5 or 6 million, right? So they're not really operating the same stratosphere when it comes to overall sales and moving devices. However, I think Samsung, I really would like to see them bring the price down. They've got to get the battery efficiency better. They've got to increase the performance and the battery efficiency, and they need to do something more special. I'm sick of getting, okay, let's take last year's camera. We'll say that we've tweaked it with the machine learning and the AI, and then we'll put the really good camera in the Ultra model, and then the S23, S23 Plus, we'll use a lesser quality one, and we'll give them a lesser quality selfie too, and then we'll dumb down the resolution. Then we won't let the screen throttle down as much, so you can get better battery life. And there's a whole litany of things that they do differently, and they dumb down the regular phones. So really, I think what's best moving forward, maybe with the S24, is 2 models, not 3, and that way there's a little bit more distinction. I think there's just too little offered in the Plus model for $1,000, and then they want you to upsell to the Ultra model, which I'm expecting good things out of the Ultra. I always get the Ultra. I like the biggest, the best, all the frills, the bells and the whistles, everything. But moral of the story is, let's wait and see what we actually get with the actual battery life. I hate all this talking about 20%, 40%. Is it tangible? Especially whenever you're looking at, like, phones 2 and 3 years ago could max out anything that Android has to throw at it. What are we actually getting out of them continuing to push the envelope on the silicon? I mean, what are we getting? Like, maybe a second faster, half a second faster processing on low light photos? So I hope something there's tangible, we can feel, and I hope that we also get, the biggest thing for me is the battery. Like, the S22 battery life is just so poor. So poor. So let's cross our fingers and hope. We'll see once we get there, and I'll keep my eyes and down the road, my ears to the ground, and see what we get, if there's anything interesting on the rumor side. But right now, really the only important things they're talking about are, well, probably a 200 megapixel camera in the Ultra. We won't see that in the S23 or the Plus, and all the stuff praising the Snapdragon 8 Generation 2, which I hope it's as good as they say it is. But it's also funny because they're like, well, it's caught up with the A15. It's not as good as the A16. And then the A17, of course, later on in the year will demolish it, which probably very true. But it doesn't matter, because they're 2 different platforms and they both work great, right? The big one for most people is, hopefully everything holds true and the Snapdragon 8 Generation 2 goes into all the S23 phones globally, and they kick the stupid Exynos chip down the road and don't use it anymore. We'll leave that to Pixel and turning it into their Tensor, right? Anyway, whole nother story. That's all I got. But if you got any questions or comments about this video, then please go to the comment section. I'll get back with you. And before anyone says it, look, I'm excited about the S23. It's always the big deal. I can't wait till it gets here in a short month and a half, 2 months. It'll be a good time. I like to place some framing on some things and have some realistic conversation about it, instead of, oh, it's so amazing, it's revolutionary, it's going to change everything. We've heard the same song and dance every single year. So let's just see what we get out of it and hope for the positive, right? So that's all I got. As always, if you enjoyed the video, please hit the like and the subscribe button and the little notification bell if you want updates when new videos come out. And as always, thanks for being here. I appreciate you watching, and I'll see you guys next time.